Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Economists Unplugged. Today, we have with us Dr. Jayash Paudel from the University of Oklahoma. Jayash, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you, Samanthi. I've been a regular viewer of the podcast and I look forward to talking with you more today.
Fabulous. I really like to hear that. So, without further ado, it would be great if you could introduce yourself to the audience, and how about you share a fun fact and a little bit about yourself, the kind of work you're doing, and how you got started.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Jayash Paudel. I'm an assistant professor of economics at the University of Oklahoma. I do research in energy, environmental, and development economics. I'm currently a managing editor at World Development Perspectives and an associate editor in energy economics, among other journals. And I work on issues pertaining to agriculture, environment, energy, mostly with a focus on economics of natural disasters and a whole variety of other policy relevant topics. A fun fact about myself is probably have to do with mountaineering. So a lot of folks end up thinking that because I'm originally from Kathmandu, Nepal, I have probably climbed Mount Everest or at least been to the base camp, and they're always disappointed when they hear I have not. And so the tallest mountain I've ever climbed is Pikes Peak in the state of Colorado, which is half as tall as Mount Everest. So I'll always have to remind them that although I'm from Nepal, I've only climbed the most visited mountain in the US, arguably. So that's my fun fact. And how did I get involved with this line of research? I think is the other question you have. So this
Yeah.
has to go back to almost 20 years ago when I came to the US as an international student from Kathmandu, Nepal. I came to Colorado College, which is a small private liberal arts college setting with a block plan. Essentially, students would take one course at a time for 3.5 weeks and then have a break for 4 days. So semester would have four multiple blocks. And the reason I'm talking about my formative years as an undergraduate is because it allowed me to work with my professors at a very young age. And so one of the requirements of being a math econ major at Colorado College was to write a 30-page long senior thesis and work with a professor. And so as a senior in college, I got an opportunity to publish my senior thesis with a professor of mine, and that led to a couple of other subsequent academic publications. So that allowed me to understand what the whole process of academic research can be and
Mm-hmm.
how one can enjoy the process of writing papers to publish papers. And so subsequently, once I graduated from Colorado College with a degree in math econ, I ended up working for a couple of years, starting from the Poverty Action Lab, where I was involved with a randomized controlled trial experiment on school vouchers, followed by a stint at the World Bank. And so naturally, with these multiple experiences, I got excited about doing academic research, and that led me to a graduate program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I was trained as an environmental economist. And since then, I've been thinking deeper about some of these topics
Mm-hmm.
pertaining to energy, environment, and broadly public policy.
That is such a very, very interesting background. And one of the things that I would like to say is that it maybe it was very challenging at that time, but I would imagine it's such a, it's a gift in disguise to be able to, write
Right.
at that, that early part of your academic career, because writing is hard and you
It
are
is.
never born with that.
And sadly, Simanti, I don't know how you feel, but our field of economics is getting so and so very quantitative oriented that we've
Mhm.
actually been less focused on writing and more focused on identification and research design, which is very important. Don't get me wrong, but I think writing allows us to think clearly and come up with
Yep.
ideas. So I'm grateful for that exposure to have the experience of writing at a younger academic trajectory.
Yes, and I agree with you. I will never forget this piece of this paper that I read after just when I was writing my dissertation by the economist John Cochrane, where he talks about, economists are not mathematicians, they are storytellers.
Right.
And that stayed with me. And it's been like this year is my 16th year after my graduation. And I still hold that phrase. Like, I always think about that. So you're absolutely correct. So moving on, you know, what is one of the most fulfilling aspects of your current professional role?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would have to say the most fulfilling aspect of my current professional role has to be complete interaction with students, undergrads who come to classrooms with immense curiosity and a lot of big dreams to have impactful work, as well as working directly with PhD students and mentoring them and helping
Hmm.
them navigate the real world. Now, I should also mention I find these fulfilling mostly because, Samantha, you know very well, academic research can be a very lonely process. Even if you co-author or collaborate with a group set of transdisciplinary researchers, because it takes so much of time between an idea being conceived that in turn gets finally published in a peer-reviewed journal article, and that takes a lot of time, multiple rounds of
Hmm.
revision and reiterations. And so when it comes to teaching, when you're interacting with students on a regular basis, the feedback that you get through working with them directly is so immediate, and that helps maintaining that momentum that we really need as academics. So, over the last 7 or 8 years or so, I've had this privilege of teaching at the same time, doing research on economical topics. And I
Hmm.
personally found working with students the most fulfilling aspect of my career.
That's awesome. And you're very right about that momentum, because that momentum, it goes, there are ebbs and flows to it. Let's put it that way. Sometimes you are, all cylinders blazing, and sometimes it's hard to get out of bed. No, I'm
Right.
joking, but you know what I mean, right?
Sure.
It's true in all professional careers. Um, this is a new question, and I'm so glad that I'm able to ask you this question. Is, what according to you is the impact of your work? And
That's
can
that's right.
can you share with us something from your professional experiences which you consider to be, very, very impactful?
Right, right. And that's a good question, Simon, because as academics, we're not really led to, we were thinking about
Yeah.
producing knowledge all the time that we sometimes overlook the impact component. Let me think. So I think at its core, I would argue that the impact of my work has mostly been making invisible risk more visible, especially in settings that are relatively understudied. So we often talk about climate change, energy transitions, or natural disasters in abstract terms. My research shows that these forces can directly affect households. What
Mm-hmm.
households exposed to some of these stressors pay for electricity, whether their water is safe to drink in the aftermath of disasters, whether they partially mitigate economic losses from some of these events, and by how much individuals exposed to these shocks lose human capital in the aftermath of wildfires or earthquakes. I'd also mention that my work has focused mostly on US as well as developing country settings, but I personally find my work in Nepal, which is where I'm originally from, to be more impactful, partly because it's so relatively understudied in economics
Mm-hmm.
literature, and
Mm-hmm.
mostly it's characterized by poor institutional governance, poverty, and reliance on remittance. And as such,
That's
I
right.
believe empirical work or empirical evidence on pressing topics pertaining to policy in data constrained countries can be more impactful, especially allowing me to recruit international students who care about these topics in those
Yeah.
settings. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, once they graduate, they can work in academic or non-academic settings, and we can make efforts toward bridging the gap between academic work and public policy. So I think probably my work focus on environmental topics in Nepal has been the most impactful to the best of my knowledge.
Awesome. I would also like to add, if I may, to your response by sharing with the audience that when I was looking at Jayash's website, I was really, very impressed by all those podcasts that you have created with all the, the technological, different AI-based
Well,
tools
I,
that
I
we
wish
have.
I wish I could take credit, Semanti, but as I told you earlier, it's mostly, Google Notebook LLM. So you just upload the PDF and it just AI generates these podcasts. So all I have to do is
Yes, yes,
input
true,
the
true.
hyperlinks.
But I won't let you like discount that effort because I feel that it is very, very important for us as scientists, whether we are social scientists or natural scientists or physical or whatever the classification of scientists is, to get our, our work out there and put it out there in different formats so that we can communicate our science. And I thought that, what you did, the effort that you put into, making those products, even if you used Google Notebook LLM, doesn't matter. I thought that was, that's a great effort. So I think that
Thank you.
like, to me, that is something that's very impactful. So yeah, so I like to share that with the audience in case, anybody's interested in, going to Jesh's website and checking out his work.
Thank you,
Great.
Samantha. And I'll probably add that actually listening to a podcast can be useful for the researcher as well. I actually learned a couple of different ways of framing my research after I listened to some of those. So you're so right, Samantha, that it can be useful in kind of having an impact on policy as well to some extent.
Great, great. Um, Looking ahead, what do you think are some of the most exciting developments we can expect in, environmental, developmental economics for in the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, so this is something I've thought quite a bit over the last 2 years as I'm at a stage thinking about, okay, what's the next topic should I be looking into?
Hmm.
And my sense is that, it's an exciting time to be an environmental economist. So I can think of three or four different dimensions where I think we might benefit a lot. So first, I would say that traditionally environmental economics has focused a lot on efficiency. So we're kind of moving from efficiency to environmental justice.
Yeah.
So things like, climate policies, how they influence inequality across income, race, and geography. I think that's going to be a policy relevant topic that a lot of us care about. Second, I would also argue that there's this whole big influx of studies looking into spillovers and leakage across geographical boundaries. So I've done a bit of work on water quality, and so applying fertilizers in one area and how that spills over and what upstream means for downstream monitoring locations. And
Yeah.
so the good news here is there's abundant amount of satellite data now we can get
Hmm.
hold of that allows us to quantify some of these environmental or agricultural spillovers in a more reliable manner. So I think that's the second dimension that I think a lot of environmental economists are really looking forward to and excited about, and
Right.
that there will be a lot of research looking into those topics. And more importantly, I think we're hearing a lot on big data and AI, and so there's this whole focus on high resolution remote sensing images, and so somehow linking those with our economic behavior or environmental outcomes. I think those are three different topics that might, as environmental economists, we might be able to have a really substantial impact.
Yes, and in some sense, when you're thinking about environmental issues, you are as good as your data,
That's
because
true.
of how difficult it is to measure many aspects of many environmental processes. Great. Now, my next question is, we all have areas where we can improve. So, would you be able to share something that you have thought about, which you would like to work on if you're not already?
Absolutely. I wish I have a solution to a couple of different things that I've been thinking about, but I can tell you two topics that I would love to improve upon. First, this is going to sound cliche, but time management. As academics, we're teaching, we're advising students, we're also thinking about research productivity, and there's editorial, service-related dimensions. And so I haven't come across the best way that allows me to efficiently balance all of these different things. And I'd love to invest a bit more on readings in terms of how other folks are actually doing a better job in balancing different type of activities. And then the second, improvement I would focus on is I wish or I would love to read and write more for fun. I think as academics, because we're in this business of knowledge production,
Yeah.
which can be very addictive. You work hard, you publish a paper, and as a younger undergrad, I would think I'll be done. But then the more you publish, you feel you want to write more. And in that process, you actually end up not reading or writing for fun. It just becomes more like work where you
Yeah.
have to continue publishing. And so I wish I could, I wish I have a better sense of a method that will allow me to break that momentum sometimes and then get into reading and writing for fun. And again, use that as an incentive to sort of, be a productive scholar. But those are two things that I've been thinking for a number of years, and I haven't come up with any solutions. So if Simanthi or other audience members have better ways, I would love to follow those and see how things can be improved.
Unfortunately, I have no guidance. I'm such a bad time manager. But
No,
I will say this though. What I have found to work for me is to recognize that, okay, I had this much time allocated for this activity, but
right,
then had to do something else. And I was feeling really bad that I did not do this first activity and had to spend time on the second one. And then I'm thinking to myself, who is going to do the second activity if not you?
right.
So I've kind of, so if that makes sense, I've kind of reframed the time management argument to not look at, again, maybe say efficiency, but looking at the fact that stuff needs to be done, even if this is not what I wanted to do. I got it done, and now you might as well feel good about it. So if that kind
That's
of makes sense, but then maybe that does not align well with time management, but more in some, in terms of feeling good about, the kind of things that you
absolutely.
have to do on a day-to-day basis to, get your projects to move forward, whether it's research, teaching, or extension. So something like that. Yeah. No. Uh, Very interesting question, in my opinion. Looking back, if we could redo something, what would that be?
Yeah, this is something I've done a lot of self-reflection on. And so, I would have to say, essentially, I would tell myself that it's okay not to go to graduate school right after college, even if you're ready and that's exactly what you want to do in the long run. I have a few years gap between my undergraduate education and when I eventually started my graduate work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm grateful too, but at the time, I'm talking about when I was actually working and not going to grad school. At the time, I often felt guilty for being
Mm-hmm.
compared to some of my aspirational peers who were already in graduate school. The problem is that even if I was working full time, it never really allowed me to enjoy my work full 100%. I spent a lot of time either thinking about graduate work or applying to graduate school multiple times and comparing myself a lot with others in mid 20s. And I wish I could have allocated that time lost in fitness or some other,
Mm-hmm.
pursuits of creative activity that would have helped me thrive even further. So I think if I could redo something, I would tell myself not to think too much and just enjoy the process, regardless of whatever career trajectory one is interested in.
That's right. That's right. That's excellent advice. And thank you so much for, sharing that part of your life with, for with us, with the audience. Um, and this next question is in a similar vein, which is, what is some advice you wish you had received from a senior professional when you were a young professional, early career researcher?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, at the beginning, I told you I was fortunate enough to have had exposure to academic research. So
Mm-hmm.
you think that I would understand this advice that I'm going to talk about, but turns out I never really reflected on that process. So the advice that, I wish I had received from a senior professional would have to be that academic work is a lot like entrepreneurship, where you have to not only manage projects and people, but also be resourceful and seek opportunities for funding and professional
Mm-hmm.
development. And as researchers, we're identifying problems, building teams, raising grant or capital, taking risk, and failing often. And trying again. And that cycle continues, except that in this case, our product happens to be knowledge and profit, if I may so, happens to be public good. And so in my case, I got into this profession for better or worse, mostly because I just wanted to write papers. And I happened to work with fantastic professors who I loved while being an undergrad. You can still do those. And there exists a lot of higher level of independence and scholarly career. Yet I think not many people tell you that academic work is probably one of the most under-recognized forms of entrepreneurship. And that's something I wish the advice I had got from a more seasoned professional.
I agree with you largely because somebody, of a very good friend of mine who is also in academia, actually mentioned this to me.
Okay.
And it really gave me perspective as an early career researcher to actually manage things in a way
Right.
to get things, get the projects moving forward. So this is, and you are not the first person in my conversations as part of Economists Unplugged who has brought this up. So yeah, you are absolutely correct. This hopefully resonates with many people who are tuning in. Um, in your current experience, given all your current experiences, what guidance do you have for early career scholars? You've talked about, being in the present and, really, valuing what you have and
Right.
treating yourselves as entrepreneurs. Anything else?
Yeah, I think for early career scholars, I can think of a couple of advices. So, first, I think diversification of Rex portfolio, right? So this is
Mhm.
going to be more focused on academic career folks. So essentially deciding what papers to write, and you can still write papers targeted to top field journals, but also go for interdisciplinary or policy oriented ones because they will help with citations and impact. So I think thinking
Mhm.
about diversification of portfolio, I think that's one guidance I would recommend. The other one would be seeking active mentorship and not hesitating to ask for opportunities. I think most
Mhm.
of the times we can just ask questions to experienced folks and you end up learning a lot from them. And more importantly, I think fundamentally, this is something I take very seriously. So I think thinking about what identity do we really want to build for oneself, right? So, as someone who's employed in an academic setting, do I want to be a student-centered instructor? Do I want to be a paper-generating machine? Do I want to contribute to advocacy, right? And so essentially, there's no one-size-fits-all type of answer that goes well here. So one has to continuously, I would say, self-evaluate one's actions and then go from there. Essentially, I think my guidance would be that regardless of what they choose to do, early career scholars should figure out a way to enjoy the process and not so and think not so much on what the outcome is going to be. And I think as long as there's enjoyment in that process, then I think the whole process goes very smoothly.
Yes. This is great stuff that you're sharing. And I think that over time, I feel that even universities, talking about an academic setting, they have gotten a lot better at
Right,
providing, resources which will help, students, early career scholars kind of,
right.
get better at,
Sure.
at these things. I do remember that there are a lot of things that, I just had to kind of, figure out. Just sit in a chair and kind of, stare into nothingness and think.
Right.
I genuinely remember being, kind of asking my department head, like, what does impact mean? And he had to break it down for me, and which was amazing.
Sure.
So, and I think nowadays, there are many more resources out there for you to be able to kind of reflect on what your identity can be and
Absolutely.
what the impact of your work can be on society. So my final question for you is, what are some exciting things that Jayesh is planning to pursue in the near future? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there are lots of exciting things in the pipeline, I would say. So I'm also at this phase of my academic career where I'm seeking some inspiration. I've
Mhm.
done some research, I've taught a lot of classes. And so over the next 4 to 6 months, I'm working on designing a new introductory course on economics of natural disasters meant for honors undergraduates in their freshman and sophomore level at the university. And so the hope there is to get students who have not been exposed to economic theory think about how we can use economic tools in answering some of these key questions pertaining to natural disasters. And at a personal level, that's something I've invested a lot of my time doing research on. So I
Mhm.
haven't come across a really comprehensive course uh, on that topic. And so that's what I'm really excited about. At a personal level, I would say at this point, there are only a handful of US states, less than five, that I haven't been to, including Nebraska, where you are, Shamanti. And so I have to do a little bit more traveling, both inside and outside the US. And so that's what I'm looking forward to at this point.
Fabulous. And for all those people out there who are interested in natural disasters and who are in a position of creating a course on that, now you know who to reach out to compare notes and share resources. But great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wish you all the best with all your exciting endeavors that you are going to pursue, and that I bet 2026 is going to be really productive.
Thank you so much, Shamanti. It was my pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to being in touch. Thank you again.
Great. Have a great day.
You too.
Awesome.